Canada's reputation as a land of opportunity now clashes with a new reality. Housing in its biggest cities has ballooned far beyond most people's reach. From Vancouver to Toronto, average home prices have outpaced income growth by double-digit margins. In Vancouver, the average home now costs over $1.17 million, but the typical family makes only about $134,000, leaving a $121,000 gap between the home's price and what most people can earn. Even nationally, average Canadian house prices, $676,600, demand an income, $150,500, well above the median household take-home, roughly $125,000. This isn't just a local problem. Housing affordability is slipping away across high-income countries as home costs far outpace income growth, fueled by restrictive land policies and surging demand. In other words, for many middle-income Canadians, home buying has become a game of chasing moving goalposts, a phenomenon mirrored in the cost of living crunch affecting urban centers worldwide. Demographic shifts and global pressures have collided with domestic policy choices to deepen Canada's housing squeeze. A recent Statistics Canada survey found 45% of Canadians feel very worried about affording a home or rent. The anxiety is especially acute for young adults. Nearly 6 in 10 under 35s say their housing plans are derailed by rising prices. Generational equity is at stake. Whereas older Canadians saw homeownership become the norm, today's middle class faces a steep climb. Government data shows nearly 1/3 of Canadians report serious difficulty paying basic bills, with housing costs the main culprit. In sum, Canada's unaffordability crisis is part of a larger global trend of housing outstripping incomes. But its combination of runaway prices, high household debt, and a highly desirable immigration policy has made the gap especially pronounced here. Canadian cities top world housing affordability charts. In Vancouver and Toronto, a full-time job in finance or tech is no guarantee of a home. Vancouver's average home now sells for about $1.17 million, yet the median household earns only $133,947, a $121,000 shortfall. Toronto is hardly better. There, an average home at about $1.06 million would require roughly $232,000 in annual income, compared to a median of $136,535. Practically, that means even dual-income families find the dream slipping out of reach. Nationally, the picture is stark. With an average price around $676,640, Canadians would need about $150,500 per year to carry the mortgage, whereas the median household makes only $124,672, a gap of nearly $26,000. These jaw-dropping gaps underscore why housing costs have become Canada's top financial burden. Mortgage payments in markets like Vancouver now gulp 40 to 60% of household income, squeezing budgets for food, savings, and everything else. Credit is stretched. Canadian families owe about $1.80 for every dollar of disposable income, among the highest household debt ratios globally. Even modest rate cuts haven't erased this debt overhang. First-time buyers, once critical to market health, have pulled back. In the third quarter of 2024, their mortgage applications fell by over 8% year over year. And despite slightly lower rates since 2023, overall home sales remain 13% below pre-pandemic levels as indebted buyers tread cautiously. In short, the cost of homeownership now vastly overshadows incomes for most Canadians, turning buying a house into a heavy political and economic debate. A cocktail of factors has driven Canada's housing costs skyward. Record low mortgage rates in the pandemic era sparked a buying spree. But as rates climbed back from approximately 3% to approximately 6%, prices only partially retreated. Population growth has kept demand high. Even before 2023, Canada welcomed about 500,000 newcomers per year. Growth in cities like Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal far outpaced new construction, tightening the squeeze. Moreover, construction itself has faced headwinds. Lumber, steel, and labor costs surged, delaying projects. Today, Canada still faces a massive housing shortfall, especially in urban centers. If we can't build a lot more housing, warns one economist, it's really hard to fix affordability. In British Columbia, for example, mortgage payments devour up to 60% of income for new buyers, not because wages have doubled, but because home prices have. On the land use side, legacy zoning rules have kept residential density low in many sought-after areas. Urban containment policies, green belts, strict zoning, may preserve open space, but they also stifle supply. Demographia notes that decades of policies aimed at limiting sprawl have had an unintended side effect. Higher land values translate to dramatically higher house prices. Canada's downtown cores have vast areas zoned for single-family homes or low-rise apartments, even as job centers concentrate in just a few cities. The result? Million-dollar homes pop up in suburbs, while hundreds of thousands of immigrants and youth cram into rental apartments or double up with parents. In short, Canada's housing problem is structural as well as cyclical. More demand isn't being met by more homes. Global money has flooded Canadian real estate as investors chase safe returns. For years, reports warned that foreign buyers were scooping up trophy homes, often leaving them empty, in places like Vancouver. Ottawa's own analysis notes that, for years, foreign money has been coming into Canada to buy up residential real estate, increasing affordability concerns in major urban centers. Those purchases help push prices higher by reducing inventory for locals. In Metro Vancouver alone, an estimated 10 to 20% of homes sat empty in recent years, many held by foreign investors. The government finally acted. In 2022, Ottawa banned non-residents from buying Canadian homes for 2 years. British Columbia and Ontario added hefty taxes on foreign purchases and vacant homes. On the campaign trail, finance ministers called the market speculative and vowed to ensure houses are used as homes for Canadian families and do not become a speculative financial asset class. Not everyone agrees these bans are a panacea. Some economists caution that cutting off outside investment could inadvertently slow the funding for new projects. Still, Canadians broadly support the restrictions. A 2025 poll found 76% back the foreign buyers ban, reflecting public anger at seeing skyscrapers owned by absentee landlords. Ultimately, foreign capital has brought more heat than light. It offers short-term cash for developers, but may also push mid-range buyers to the sidelines. Canada's open immigration policy has become a double-edged sword in the housing debate. Immigration drives economic growth, but also adds tens of thousands of new households annually. In prime job markets like Toronto and Vancouver, newcomers often compete for the same scarce apartments or condos, intensifying demand. The connection is plain. More people needing homes pushes up prices, especially since newcomers often settle in city centers. One mortgage industry report bluntly ties city spikes in house prices to this influx. In popular suburbs, the arrival of new families and high-skilled workers has coincided with price hikes of 5 to 10% per year, compounding the affordability crisis. This pressure has forced Ottawa's hand. In October 2024, Canada unveiled a landmark change. Immigration targets for 2025 to 27 were cut by approximately 20%, from 500,000 planned entrants in 2024 to 395,000 in 2025, 380,000 in 2026, and 365,000 in 2027. The government said the move would pause population growth in the short term to alleviate pressures on housing, infrastructure, and social services. Even temporary residents, students, and workers are now capped, aiming to keep newcomers closer to 5% of the population. It's a stark U-turn. Canada once bragged about record immigration to power its economy, but now faces the reality that adding nearly 1% of people each year can outstrip the housing supply. The government argues that well-managed, slower growth will help align housing availability with demand. Yet not everyone accepts that migrants are the problem. In fact, many newcomers feel unfairly blamed. A recent Ledger poll found nearly 7 in 10 immigrants believe politicians are using immigration as a red herring for deeper issues. Housing experts agree that even before Canada's record immigration, a shortage of zoning and homes was driving up prices. One expert notes that high immigration alone doesn't necessarily mean newcomers are responsible for unaffordable shelter. Indeed, most economists say that without more housing supply and different policies, lower immigration would only delay the squeeze. Whether you see them as the cause or just a symptom, it's clear that the sheer number of people seeking homes has become central to Canada's affordability puzzle. Buying a home now often means assuming debts that dwarf income. Canadian households carry eye-popping debt levels, around 180% of their disposable income by 2024, largely thanks to mortgages. The typical Canadian owes $1.80 for every dollar earned. When interest rates hit 5% in 2023, those variable rate borrowers felt their payments surge. Although rates have eased, the backlog of debt hasn't vanished. Nearly one-third of Canadians report serious trouble meeting basic needs, including housing, in the past year. The Bank of Canada warns that these leveraged families are vulnerable to financial shocks because wages aren't keeping pace and inflation is still high. In markets like Vancouver, where the median home exceeds $1.2 million, many prospective buyers simply can't qualify for a mortgage under Canada's strict stress tests. This tight credit is choking off the market. The Bank of Canada notes that subdued sales and construction activity will likely persist until debt is unwound. First-time buyers are especially stuck. 2024 data shows they're tendering 8% fewer mortgage applications than the year before. As one report puts it, high household debt plus rising prices have created a borrowing frenzy, followed by caution. It's a cliff effect. Borrowers at the limit can't buy more homes, so even modest interest cuts, which would normally spur demand, fail to reignite the market. In practical terms, Canadians report debt payments taking a bigger bite of income than ever before, and many are shelving life plans. For young adults in particular, high rent inflation, about 8% year over year as of late 2024, and debt means delaying marriage, children, or home purchase, believing the dream of ownership is fading. In the city, the strain is visible everywhere. Condos tout luxury labels, while street parking becomes scarce and basement apartments multiply. 9 out of 10 Canadians now identify housing costs as their leading worry. A federal survey in 2024 found that 45% of people felt very concerned about rising rents and home prices. Among renters and young people, the concern was even higher. Nearly 6 in 10 under 35s reported being very concerned about affording a place to live. In cities like Toronto and Vancouver, tales abound of families doubling up across apartments, seniors skipping meals to pay bills, and graduates returning home. Homelessness grows even as normal citizens barely scrape by. In Vancouver, a 2025 count found over 3,000 people living rough, many once regular citizens priced out by rent spikes. Canadians describe housing as a dagger to their wallets. Mortgage costs now command what was once called one's housing miracle. It used to be that a mortgage payment under 30% of income was a rule of thumb for affordability, but now many pay well above 50%. More families are forgoing vacations or reducing savings just to cover rent or mortgage. The stress is highest among renters, who face double-digit rent hikes. New data shows rents up 8% year-on-year, outpacing wage gains. Stories of bidding wars for underpriced homes are common. Yet the hardship is uneven. Lower-cost cities like Calgary or Winnipeg, where incomes still exceed housing costs, often see younger people migrate from BC on to buy, reflecting a quiet flight from the unaffordable coasts. In many ways, the housing crunch has rewritten how Canadians live and plan for the future, from who can afford kids to who even stays in their hometown. Facing public outrage, all levels of government have scrambled to respond. The federal government rolled out a multi-billion-dollar housing plan, cutting taxes on new rentals, fast-tracking zoning changes, and injecting cash into affordable units. By 2024, Ottawa had already promised over $60 billion for housing programs and incentives. Municipalities like Toronto and Vancouver raised development fees, loosened height limits downtown, and approved high-density projects. Yet implementation lags. Critics say the supply hasn't budged fast enough. Meanwhile, provinces introduced targeted measures. Ontario's rent control for newer units, BC's vacancy tax on empty homes, both aimed at nudging property toward actual residents. On the demand side, Ottawa's weapon of choice has been regulation. The foreign buyers ban extension to 2027 and vacant home taxes are intended to redirect investment and speculative capital. In late 2024, the finance minister pledged to use all possible tools so that houses are used as homes, not investment vehicles. Provincial governments have flirted with ideas like surtaxes on layered homes or deferring mortgages for young buyers. Some jurisdictions are even linking immigration to housing. An April 2025 poll found nearly 60% of Canadians believe newcomers should only be admitted if housing supply permits. This attitude shapes policy. As long as supply remains tight, politicians will face pressure to either damp demand through immigration caps or higher rates, or ramp up build-out. It's a tightrope with no easy answers, and many Canadians feel the responses have been either too slow or misdirected. Vancouver and Toronto have become emblematic case studies. Their skylines of condo towers hide underlying struggles. Middle-class families are pushed to the suburbs, while inner cities age into bedroom communities for the ultra-wealthy. In Vancouver, over a dozen high-rises rise each year, yet about 11% of homes remain unoccupied by residents, often owned by trusts or foreign entities. Planners in Toronto debate whether to tear down single-family zoning in entire neighborhoods to accommodate more homes, a proposal bitterly opposed by some local residents. The friction is growing. Stories of demo-victions, developments buying out tenants, and rent spikes make headlines, fueling public distrust of developers and financial landlords. Yet alternative approaches are brewing. Some cities have relaxed rules to allow laneway suites, small apartments above garages, and mid-rise buildings along main streets. A few suburbs are considering light rail to encourage growth outside dense cores. Meanwhile, community land trusts and co-op housing models are gaining interest as long-term affordable options. These local experiments mirror global debates. Like London's effort to curtail luxury flats or Singapore's public housing model, Canada's cities are searching for a balance. The question looming over Toronto or Montreal is whether to choose up, denser infill, or out, expanding sprawl. Each path with trade-offs for infrastructure, environment, and community. For now, though, the only clear trend is that the most unaffordable markets in the English-speaking world include Vancouver, 12.3 times income, and Toronto, 9.3 times, putting them just behind Hong Kong and Sydney globally. Canada's crisis has global echoes. Cities from Sydney to Los Angeles have seen similar bubbles in the last decade. In fact, recent global housing surveys rank Canada among the worst in price-to-income affordability. High-income countries once saw housing as tame inflation hedges, but now face widespread backlash. Governments from Britain to New Zealand have tried foreign buyers' taxes or lottery-based home allocations, often with mixed results. One often cited analogy is that home prices can behave like a speculative asset bubble. When rates are ultra-low and supply restricted, prices inflate until even fundamental buyers can't afford entry. Canada's saga is thus a cautionary tale about unchecked growth and policy inertia. Yet there are brighter notes internationally. Some cities have broken their own booms by long-term planning. In Tokyo, deliberate deregulation in the late 20th century led to a boom in housing supply, which eventually eased prices, something some Canadians point to as a model. Elsewhere, a new emphasis on multi-generational living or flexible work has slightly alleviated city pressure. And globally, younger generations are pressuring leaders to treat housing as a right, not just a market. Urbanists in Canada look to strategies like value capture, taxing gains from rezoning, and transit-oriented development, ideas already used in Europe. The implicit message is that housing crises are solvable, but only with coordinated, sustained action. The road ahead is uncertain, but one thing is clear. Canadians are demanding change. In recent years, we have heard city residents marching with placards, younger voters pressing politicians for housing solutions, and entire communities discussing rentals over dinners. Some of the most surprising insights point to collaboration over conflict. For example, research suggests that high immigration need not crush housing if accompanied by aggressive builds and infrastructure planning. One expert points out that blaming newcomers ignores that the housing crisis is not new, reminding us that supply-side fixes, like rezoning and construction, are the only durable solutions. Equally, economists are increasingly warning that overly restrictive finance rules or bans may only stall supply, reinforcing shortages. In the end, Canada's housing odyssey may hinge on reconciling short-term pain with long-term gain. Will policymakers double down on regulation, or will they pivot to massive, affordable construction? The final word isn't written yet. What is certain is that the current status quo is politically unsustainable. When mortgages cost more than savings and homes are more bank accounts than addresses, voters will demand action. If you found this deep dive insightful, please hit like, leave a comment below with your thoughts, and subscribe for more explainer videos on economics and policy. Your engagement helps spread the conversation and can make a difference in how these issues are addressed. Thank you for watching.